Was it the action of Philibert, overwhelmed with distinctions by the Bourbons, made captain of first rank on July 1st, 1814, Chevalier of the Legion of Honor on the 12th, Chevalier of St. Louis on the 18th. He had nevertheless said to the Emperor on the 3rd of July, 1815, the frigates will do all they can to elude or to harass the cruiser, and if they are attacked, they will sink themselves rather than cease fire before your Majesty orders it himself. It was therefore in the letter and in the spirit of these instructions on the 10th he was still there when he ordered his division to prepare to fly. This order he revoked on the 11th. Did he think that by the messenger who brought the Paris papers of the 5th to Rochefort counter orders had arrived? Must we believe that in the face of the uncertainty of the restoration of the Bourbons, Bonfou, Philibert, and Becker had preferred to hold their hand? On the morning of the 12th, the Emperor left the Salle and was conveyed to the island of Aix, where he took up his abode. Henceforth, the return was made to adventurous plans, the sloops of Baudin, which would be taken to Royan, or better still, a fishing smack, which the young officers volunteered to steer to the open sea as far as the first merchant ship, which could be boarded or bought, or again an American schooner, which Joseph had chartered at Bordeaux, in which he had come to offer his brother. All this was in the air. The Emperor allowed to be spoken of in his presence, and made a show of discussing and forbidding nothing, since he did not recover the command of the army, since he did not pass the sovereign on the frigates, and was not provided with a safe conduct vessel which would shield him from all insulting inquiry. He saw only one recourse: to request refuge in England. And already he reminded himself of the incident in Greek history where Themistocles requested a refuge of the king of Persia, an incident about which he was going to write very soon. The kind of little court which surrounded the emperor was oddly at variance as to what ought to be done, and had already manifested those differences which, under the appearance of excessive devotion, were to render intolerable the end of Napoleon's life. Some of them were inclined to a bold move, and besought Napoleon not to trust the English, whose entire history they recalled. The majority were of the opinion that they should go to the cruiser, and the danger with which certain of them thought they were threatened strengthened their conviction. One of them began to insult anyone who contradicted him. Madame Bertrand, whose father was English, having spent a great part of her childhood in England, cried. The only plan which offered any chance of success was that of confiding in Baudin. Doubtless Baudin had, as he himself wrote, no affection for this man, nor even pity for his misfortunes. But then this man has not known how to die. He did not want him to fall into the hands of these infamous English alive, and he would do all he could to save him. Besides, this proud cripple, whose reputation for courage left nothing to be desired, had fortune in his pope. But the emperor must reach Royan, where the soups were, by land, because of the instructions he had received not to allow Napoleon once on board to disembark. Becker was, however, opposed to it. On the 13th, the emperor took his departure. On the morning of the 14th, he sent in truce ships to the Belfrin, Las Casas, and General Aleron. Las Casas again mentioned the safe conduct boats and the voyage to America, but Maitland merely answered, I have no authority to agree to any arrangement of that sort, but I think I can assume the responsibility of receiving the emperor on board for the purpose of conveying him to England. And perhaps, he added, as he wrote later, nevertheless I cannot make any promise concerning the arrangements of my government regarding him, since, in the event I have just implied, I shall be acting upon my own responsibility without being sure that my conduct will meet with the approval of the government. Then he spoke of the measures to be adopted, the suitable reception, the generous generous feelings of the English nation. The asylum it would certainly offer to such refugees as Lalemant and Savary. We can believe that on 2 counts they were sincere. Lalemant knew his head was in danger. Las Casas was very new to such affairs, puffed up by his own importance, disposed to presume his desires to be realities, but anxious to report good news to the emperor in order to render himself indispensable. He had to convince himself that some words of courtesy were actually promises. And on the other hand, why had Maitland been so exceedingly obliging when the means of carrying off without even any opposition the most highly prized trophy which fortune could reserve for an English officer was in his hands? Furthermore, he was a soldier and a brave one. There were doubtless under the English flag soldiers who, through ignorance or superstition, believed in British integrity and the generosity of the nation, but Maitland might not be in good faith and might not believe with sincerity that England would pride herself on offering hospitality to her defeated enemy. When Las Casas and Lalemant returned to the island of Aix, the emperor, as a matter of form, held the last council. Lalemant and perhaps Montauban were still against the plan. All the orders were in favor of it. The emperor, however, had made up his mind. He himself wrote a letter to the Prince Regent, with the delivery of which into proper hands Gourgaud was entrusted. Then he would request passports for America, and failing this, seek refuge in England. The emperor would take the name of Colonel Muron, would live in a country house 10 or a dozen leagues from London, sufficiently large to accommodate everybody. If the minister is desirous of stationing an English superintendent near me, added Napoleon, he will see that there will be no semblance of slavery. Las Casas returned with Gourgaud to the Bellerophon and requested that Gourgaud be sent to England without delay, while he himself with Maitland made preparations for the reception of the emperor on board. Actually, Gourgaud was sent off on the Slaney, which had rejoined the cruiser. Las Casas spent the night on the Bellerophon, and noticing the obvious uneasiness of Maitland, lest the emperor should escape him, conceived a less favorable idea of the hospitality which was reserved to him. During the night on the schooner Sophie and the brig Epervier, the emperor's luggage was loaded, including his carriage and 2 horses, and the greater part of the retinue embarked. At daybreak on July 15th, the emperor, who had again adopted the military demeanor relinquished since he left Malmaison, embarked on the Epervier. He was received by a guard of honor at 6 o'clock at the moment when the superb flying the flag of Admiral Sir Henry Hotham entered the bay. The emperor boarded the Bellerophon. None of the honors usually done to a person of high rank were according to him. The early hour gave me the excuse. Maitland wrote, it not being customary to pay such honors before the colors are hoisted at 8 a.m. The Epervier sailed away, saluting the emperor with acclamation and flying the tricolor to the last. But here was an opportunity as the night of the 14th and 15th drew on. The new prefect of Charente, a Baron Richard, a conventional regicide and friend of Fouché, arrived from Paris during the consulate. This man was prefect of Haute-Garonne, in 1806 prefect of Lower Charente, a post he held until September 1814. Then he was superseded with a gratuity of 24,000 francs and a pension of 6,000, prefect of Calvados on March 22nd, 1815. He checked anarchy and defended the loyal supporters of the king. That is why the emperor had dismissed him after 6 weeks, but the king had just recalled him and appointed him prefect at Rochefort. Doubtless he would be inclined to carry out the secret orders of Fouché, but he was bearing instructions addressed to Bonfou, dated the 10th, from the minister of Marie Jaucourt, formerly senior chamberlain to King Joseph, and his senator Jaucourt, in the name of Louis XVIII, confirmed the instructions forwarded by the Provisional Commission. According to the Commission's orders to you, you must resist all attempts to land Napoleon, either alone or with others. You must resist with the like persistence all communication which he might seek to establish with the English vessels, either the cruiser or the other. I confirm those arrangements, monsieur, which at the moment of writing assure inform me that Napoleon is aboard the frigate the Sal under command of Captain Philibert. I formally add to these orders that Napoleon must not, under any pretext whatever, leave the frigate on which he has embarked, out of which Captain Philibert must in any event hold the command. Accordingly, Joker ignored the commission's decree and Decray's dispatches of the 6th, by which permission to communicate with the cruiser had been granted, provided the emperor submitted a request in writing. These documents must have mystified Joker, for the orders, which he thought still held good. He added another, requesting the frigate and the pilot boat to return to port immediately with everyone who is on board. Nothing, he said, must hinder this measure, which must be carried out without any communication with the frigate Napoleon is on, and executed with equal prudence and speed. Bonnefoy received these orders of Joker from Richard before nightfall. He knew that at daybreak on the following day the emperor would go to the English cruiser, so he gained time by leaving late and making for the Salle, upon which he knew the emperor was not reaching it at 1 o'clock in the morning, leaving Philibert to dispatch an express messenger to Becker to forestall him, and showing no inclination to go down to the island of Aix himself. Richard did not seem to have insisted in any way upon the discharge of the orders which he had brought and of which he had knowledge. In so doing, was he not acting in accordance with instructions from Fouché, who was then devoting himself to the task of helping the victims to escape the royalist reaction, and who in most cases succeeded? Moreover, although not in the least agreed in their opinions, and although their loyalty was questionable, all the men, Richard as well as Bonnefoy, Philibert as well as Becker, who could then influence the lot of the emperor, half expected that he would go, that at least he would give the appearance of going voluntarily, and that he would spare them the shame of giving him up. Becker, according to the public account, 20 years later, adopted an unnatural attitude of respect and devotion, asserting that he had bestowed upon the outlaw attentions which the emperor had awaited in vain from all the others, and that he was constantly favored by the requests of the emperor, all of which he carried out almost as conscientiously as the commission's orders. This had not lessened his desire to satisfy the commission, for on his return to Paris on July 21st, he wrote to the Duke of Otranto, Fouché, to the effect that, as a reward for the duty he had just fulfilled and as an indication of the government's satisfaction, he requested the distinction of the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor. Fouché, who had no further need of him, wrote in the margin of his letter, "Write him a courteous letter and promise him the support of the minister. Some treatment is degrading, especially when one has anticipated recognition of his service and no gratitude is forthcoming. Appreciation soon becomes tangible, however, for in 1818 he was included in the list of 8 lieutenants general appointed to command the army. In 1819, Decazes made him a peer of France. In 1828, the coronation made him a knight of St. Louis, and in 1831 he obtained from Louis Philippe the Grand Cross of the Legion. It was all he had to live on. Baron Richard, a solitary exception under the law which struck down regicides, obtained besides an annual allowance of 6,000 francs. Philibert still held his command and received a rosette in 1821 and the rank of captain of the first line in 1822, but Bonnefoy was dismissed. Jourdan de la Passetière, commander of the Epervier, was appointed to no active service. The officers who had volunteered for service on the fishing smack were dismissed by the Navy and were subject to the superintendents of the police, and in the same way officers like Masson and Baudin, who either directly or indirectly had engaged to compass the escape of Napoleon, were dismissed or compelled to resign from these decrees over which Joker presided. One can gather to what extent certain members of the Royal Council had been deceived by the Emperor's departure. What had they intended to do with him? Firstly, the essential fact, both for the Bourbons and the English, was that of preventing him by a voluntary surrender, by freely putting himself under the protection of English laws, by begging a refuge in England from evading the character of a prisoner, being taken, even disarmed, but in spite of himself and against his will. The man who was exiled from Europe was responsible either to Europe, but before which court? Or to the monarchy which Europe had just then restored, and which could consider Napoleon a rebel, so long as he was liable, which he was not, or a pirate by virtue of the Treaty of Fontainebleau, of which it had broken all the clauses. This was not done to hinder him, nor yet England, who from the first had acted on this assumption. If we take Bonaparte, Lord Liverpool wrote to Lord Castlereagh on July 7th, we must keep him on board until the decision of the Allies has been received. The most convenient plan will be to give him back to the King of France, but then we must be quite sure that action will be taken against him and that he will have no chance to escape. I have had several talks with lawyers, and they are of the opinion that this would in every respect be the plan least likely to offer objection. We shall have the right of considering him a French prisoner, and as such we can return him to the French government. Assured of the approval of his allies, King Louis XVIII would have preferred to seize the usurper himself rather than wait for the English to hand him over to him. And that is why Jaucourt, the naval minister, had sent Bonfou by Baron Richard. They ordered to put the emperor secretly aboard the Sal, but the plan which had been put off, namely the execution of the emperor upon the bare proof of his identity, could not at the moment be carried out without serious inconvenience. Since the King of France had gained the victory at Waterloo, Wellington, Castlereagh, France had gained the victory at Waterloo, Posta de Borgo, who acted with him as allies, of whose opinions notice had to be taken, had been engaged in showing him that France was not a country he could conquer, or where he could with impunity pursue the system of government which had rendered inevitable the revolution of March 20. They had forced him to drive out Blacas, to remove the Count d'Artois, to oblige Fouché and Talleyrand to attempt the experiment of constitutional government. They saw the consequences of a murder which might widen the abyss between France and the king they had imposed upon it. They convinced and conceived what an outpouring of horror would have arisen from the nation and the army, and it would all be paid for by his head if they did not fear this general upheaval. At least they did not pass any opinion with regard to promoting it. This pressure which the Allied representatives had exerted on Paris was revealed in the letter of Lord Liverpool of the 15th, replying to Viscount Castlereagh. If you decide, he wrote, to obtain possession of his person, Napoleon, and if the King of France does not feel himself strong enough to deliver him up to the justice as a rebel, we are ready to assume the custody of his person in the name of the Allied powers. And actually, we think that it would be better if he were entrusted to us rather than to any other member of the Confederation. And henceforth, Lord Liverpool announced that the ministry strongly favored the opinion that the best place for the custody would be at a distance from Europe, and that the Cape of Good Hope and St. Helena would be the best places for this plan. This dispatch from Lord Liverpool was a substitute for the letter from Castlereagh, which was not recovered, in which he summed up the case, it being thus explained in these terms. Jaucourt, on July 13th, acting under orders from the king, dispatched to Rochefort a frigate captain, his aide-de-camp, de Rigny, accompanied by a naval lieutenant, Fleuriot de Rigny, who was not 29 years of age when the emperor promoted him to his rank, had received instructions to see that Napoleon was aboard the Sal. He was no longer a passenger. He was a prisoner for whom the commander of the frigate was responsible to the king. The frigate must not leave the roads without a royal order. Napoleon Bonaparte is not the prisoner of the King of France only. He is a prisoner of all the sovereigns under the Treaty of Paris, and all the princes to whom he has broken his own promises in carrying on war and revolution in France have an equal claim to his person. Under such circumstances, it is therefore a natural conclusion that the proper means of making sure Napoleon Bonaparte shall be taken immediately, and this would be fruitless if the King of France should allow the natural generosity of his heart to prevail. It is not today a question only of his personal cause. It is the business of all Europe to prevent Napoleon returning. Consequently, the commander of the English forces, which are are blocking the roads of the island of X, has been ordered by his government to summon the commander of the vessel bearing Napoleon Bonaparte to hand the latter over to him at once. The captain of the French frigate de Rigny delivered a letter to this effect from J.W. Croker, Secretary of the Admiralty, addressed to the commander of the English station. The Minister of Marine added to it his instructions for Commander Philibert, and the Minister of War, Marshal Gouvion Saint-Cyr, his for the commander of the island of Aix. The officers were to deliver the prisoner to the English commander. The orders you are delivering, Rochefoucauld, are dictated by human feeling. The sentiment alone has prompted the intervention of the king's ministers, since the allied sovereigns could act without the cooperation of France. The Minister of Marine thus arranged the details of the transaction. When the Rigny had adequate consultations with Bonfou and had conceived sufficiently certain ideas concerning the position of the vessels and the presence of Napoleon Bonaparte, he should return alongside the boat of the commander of the English station. He should hand over to this officer the papers in his charge, and in the greatest detail give him his side of all he had learned at Rochefort, and communicate to him the minister's dispatch, the details of which have been drawn up with the collaboration of his Britannic Majesty. So says Castlereagh. And what then? What would they do then if Commander Philibert at the first summons refused to hand over to the commander of the English forces the royal exile who had come voluntarily to take refuge on board his vessel? What would they do? All the forces which attack Napoleon Bonaparte will be French and European forces. They will act in the name of the King of France as well as in the name of their respective sovereigns. And in consequence, the French who do not wish to act rebelliously against their king and country must treat as allies, as friends, the commanders of the land and sea forces fighting to seize Napoleon Bonaparte. Commander Philibert should not regard only as an English officer the commander of the English naval forces. He is in the service of all the sovereign allies of His Majesty. He is a servant of the King of France. And in conclusion, Chaucoeur resorted to threats. If you are so criminal and blind, he wrote, as to oppose what I have ordered, you will be condoning open rebellion against your king and country. You will be responsible for the blood shed and for the destruction of a vessel and crew, which you ought to protect for your country. You will even compromise the life of the prisoner, whom you have hesitated to give up.